the 7th of July, 2005. 8 hours, 50 minutes, and 1 seconds hours. Aldgate Underground Station. Eastbound platform. The Circle Line train from King's Cross had arrived at 8:49. I was standing at the platform's eastern end, 63 meters from the train's second carriage, running the final leg of a surveillance detection route that had begun at Canary Wharf at 7:15. The route was standard. The objective was a dead-drop location in the Whitechapel district, 400 meters east of the station entrance. I had 9 minutes to reach it within the operational window. At 8 hours, 50 minutes, and 1 seconds, the second carriage of the Circle Line train detonated. The formation's response was immediate and automatic. Not the institutional response, not the human response, the formation's response. Threat assessment, before the sound had finished resolving. Proximity, 63 meters. Structural cover, platform columns, 0.4 meters width. Inadequate. Exit vectors, platform stairs, 45 meters north, compromised by civilian movement. Secondary threat, unknown. The instinct is to move. The formation says, assess first. I stood at the platform's eastern end for approximately 4 seconds. Then I moved north toward the stairs. The Aldgate dead drop would not be serviced that morning. What was already in it had been there since June 19th. The material was documented. The archive held it. I want you to understand something before this file goes further. I am not going to tell you what was in that dead drop before I tell you what the file on the man I had been watching for 9 months contained. Both matter. The sequence matters. What was in the dead drop is the second half of this file. The first half is the man at the Anchor Pub on Park Street every Thursday from November 2004 to July 3, 2005. His file name is Howell. London, November 2004. The Thames moves through the city at a tidal pace, approximately 1.2 meters per second, at the embankment at high tide. The specific quality of a river governed not by alpine momentum, but by the Atlantic. The tidal pull makes the Thames a river that reverses direction twice daily, moving east with the outgoing tide and west with the incoming. The only calibration reference in the operational career's geography that required not a single registered speed, but a registered pattern of change. The formation noted this on the first morning. Tidal rivers require tidal thinking. The speed you register at 0800 is not the speed at 1,400. Filed. The operational accommodation was in Bermondsey, south of the river. Second floor, 41 square meters. Window facing north toward the Thames. The 4,100 Kelvin desk lamp. The coffee machine required grind adjustment from the first morning 87 degrees Celsius initial extraction, corrected to 90 on the second day, standard. The Bermondsey accommodation had a quality the previous postings had not produced. Visible from the window, on clear mornings, the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, 1.4 kilometers northwest across the river. Christopher Wren's completion of 1,708. 297 years old, in November 2004, and indifferent to the specific operational problem, developing 1.4 kilometers to its southeast, in a second-floor room with a corrected coffee machine and a file that had been 31 words in February and would not stay that way. This account follows a single operational career. 31 years. 7 countries. The story that the official record was never designed to contain. Each file stands alone if this is the first you have opened. The context you need is this: the gap between what intelligence institutions say they know and what they actually know is not a failure of the institution. It is a structural feature of how institutions process information. Visibility is managed. What gets seen and what does not is not random. This file is about that management, and about what it costs when the management is deliberate. Now, Howell. The first surveillance observation of the man filed as Howell occurred on November 14, 2004, at 1,815 hours. The Anchor Pub, Park Street, Bankside, London SE1. Corner table, north wall, 3.2 meters from the bar, facing the entrance. He had arrived at 1,807 8 minutes before the observation began. He had ordered a pint of bitter, the specific English institutional beverage that communicates belonging without communicating preference, and he had placed his briefcase on the chair to his left. Not under the table, not on the floor, on the chair. The briefcase placement was a detail the formation registered and did not immediately classify. A briefcase on a chair is either a habit or a signal. At 1,807, with no contact in the room, the classification probability was 0.53 habit, 0.47 signal, filed as unresolved. Howell was 48 years old in November 2004, British. Senior analytical position in the UK-US intelligence sharing framework, specifically the Threat Assessment Coordination Desk that processed joint intelligence products from both the American and British institutional environments and determined which products received elevated dissemination and which were processed at standard levels. His institutional position was the specific kind of position that the entity had been building toward for 6 years since the Brussels period. Not a collection position, not a field position, a visibility position. The person who decided what got seen. The third file had contained his name since February 2004, 31 words. The Cairo posting had confirmed the entity's operational reach in the Middle Eastern and North African environments. The London posting was the first posting where the formation would be running in the entity's own institutional geography. The entity was not a foreign service and not a non-state actor. The entity was American institutional. Operating in London meant operating adjacent to the entity's own framework. The operational geometry was different from every previous posting. In Beirut, the entity was hunting observers. In Cairo, the entity was managing information flows. In London, the entity was the architecture itself. Stop. Before I give you the July 3rd meeting, I need you to have the weight of what 9 months of Thursday observations produced. Because the July 3rd meeting only means what it means if you understand what the previous 36 Thursdays had built. From November 2004 to June 2005, Howell arrived at the Anchor Pub every Thursday between 1,803 and 1,812 hours. He ordered the same pint. He placed the briefcase on the same chair. He sat at the same table. He stayed between 47 and 61 minutes. He left alone. He did not meet anyone. Not in November, not in December, not across the first 4 months of 2005. 33 consecutive Thursdays of a man sitting at a corner table in a Bankside pub, briefcase on a chair to his left, alone. The formation had been built to read exactly this, the pattern that is visible not in what is present, but in what is consistent. Consistency is its own category of data. A man who does the same thing, in the same place at the same time, for 33 consecutive weeks is not relaxing. He is maintaining a protocol, and a protocol maintained for 33 consecutive weeks without a contact is a protocol that is waiting. The probability assessment at the close of the 33rd Thursday, June 30th, 2005, 0.78 active dead drop protocol, inactive contact phase. 0.14 surveillance detection routine, monitoring for observation before activation. 0.08 all other categories. Filed. The dead drop hypothesis meant there was a location in or near the Anchor Pub that Howell was servicing regularly, without appearing to service it. The formation had swept the pub's accessible areas twice in February and once in April. Nothing located. The location, if it existed, was in a part of the pub's geography the formation had not accessed. The protocol continued. The formation continued watching. The briefcase continued occupying the left chair. The probability assessment moved on the 34th Thursday, July 3rd, 2005, 1,809 hours. Howell arrived at the anchor. Same table, same briefcase placement, same pint. At 1,834 hours, a second person entered the pub and sat across from Howell, not at Howell's invitation. No visible greeting, no acknowledgement, no eye contact at the moment of sitting. A professional non-greeting, the specific absence of acknowledgement that two people produce when they do not want the acknowledgement to be observed. The recognition was in the stillness, not in the gesture. The second man's file name, Tariq, Lebanese, is A. 41 years old in July 2005. Operational background in the North African and Middle Eastern institutional environments. The formation had registered his name in two separate dead-drop material sets from the Cairo posting in February 2004. Not a network member, not a confirmed entity instrument. A confirmed presence in the entity's operational geography. A known quantity in the parallel network the entity had been running since at least 2001. The 0.89 probability weight from Cairo had never been resolved to certainty in either direction. Sitting across from Howell at 1,834 hours on July 3, 2005, it resolved. Compound probability assessment, 0.004. That Tariq's presence in the anchor on this specific Thursday, at this specific table, opposite a UK-US intelligence framework visibility manager, was coincidental. Compound probability of operational connection, 0.996. Filed immediately. At 1,836 hours, the formation was already constructing the report structure while the observation was still active. They spoke for 22 minutes. The pub ambient noise at a level that made the specific content of the conversation inaudible from the formation's position 4.1 meters away at the bar. What was audible? Cadence, register, the specific quality of a conversation that is not casual. No laughter, no raised inflection. The specific flat register of two people exchanging data rather than conversation at 1,856 hours. Tariq left. Howell remained for 7 additional minutes, finished his pint, collected his briefcase, and left through the south entrance at 1,903 hours. The formation left through the north entrance at 1,904, ran a surveillance detection route for 34 minutes through Bankside and the Borough Market area. Clean, no coverage. The dead drop at Whitechapel, the same dead drop that would go unserviced on the morning of July 7th, was serviced at 2,047 hours. The Tariq Howell observation documented and deposited. The material was out of the formation's possession and in the archive before midnight on July 3rd. On June 18th, 16 days before the July 3rd meeting, the formation had filed a formal assessment through the assigned institutional channel. The assessment documented the 3-3 Thursday protocol, the Howell institutional position, the entity's operational presence in the UK intelligence framework, and the probability assessment that Howell's position made him a structural risk to the integrity of threat assessments produced by the UK-US sharing framework. The assessment was 14 pages. It was received at 0916 hours on June 18th by the institutional inbox of the assigned receiving officer. The receiving officer's institutional position was 2 levels below the entity's operational reach. The assessment was not elevated. It was processed at standard level, filed in the category of assessments requiring follow-up analysis before action consideration. The follow-up analysis timeline, 90 days. 90 days from June 18th is September 15th, 2005. The timeline the formation had established through 9 months of Thursday observation, the assessment filed on June 18th. The dead drop material from July 3rd, all of it sitting in the institutional pipeline on the morning of July 7th, 2005, processing on a 90-day timeline. While at 8 hours 50 minutes and 1 seconds hours, the second carriage of a Circle Line train detonated at Aldgate. Hold that for a moment. Not because I am going to tell you the assessment could have prevented what happened on July 7th. The probability assessment on that specific counterfactual is 0.31 yes, 0.69 no. Intelligence assessments about one institutional actor's visibility management do not produce straight lines to the operational decisions of a separate network. The chain of causation is longer and more complex than that. The formation does not reach conclusions its evidence cannot support. What I am telling you is something different. The gap between what was in the institutional pipeline on the morning of July 7th and what the official account of that morning has ever described as having been in the institutional pipeline is the subject of this file. Not the attack, not the failure, the gap. The gap is the entity's work. Here is what the SDR on the morning of July 7th produced after the formation cleared the Aldgate platform and reached street level. I walked north on Aldgate High Street. The sound behind me had produced the specific atmospheric quality of a city registering something it could not yet categorize. Not panic, not order. The specific urban register of a large event whose nature has not yet been communicated through official channels, but whose physical reality has been registered by everyone within the acoustic radius. The city knowing something had happened. The city not yet knowing what. Temperature, 23 degrees Celsius. July, London. Heat, the specific warmth of a city built in a river valley at 51 degrees north latitude, where summer accumulates in the stone. Breath vapor normally dispersing in 0.3 seconds in the July air was not dispersing normally. The particulate density from the Aldgate event had altered the immediate atmospheric condition, registered, filed. The formation running continuously at 0851 on a morning when the city was registering the beginning of something. At 0854 hours, standing at the corner of Aldgate High Street and Whitechapel Road, I made a decision. The Whitechapel dead drop was 400 meters east. The material in it, the July 3rd Tariq Howell observation, deposited on the night of July 3rd, was already in the archive. It did not need retrieval. What it needed was verification, confirmation that the location had not been compromised in the 4 days since deposition. Standard protocol after an event of this scale in the operational geography. Go to the drop. Do not retrieve. Assess the location's integrity. Leave. The assessment took 7 minutes. The location was intact. The formation left. The material was safe. At 0917 hours, update the institutional report. The June 18th assessment, sitting on a 90-day processing timeline, now had a data point that moved the probability weights. Not the attack itself. The formation does not draw institutional lines between an entity's visibility management and a network's operational decision without evidence of coordination. What existed was the July 3rd Tariq Howell meeting. Tariq's presence in the entity's operational geography since at least 2001. Howell's institutional position. The timing. July 3rd, 4 days before July 7th. Tariq in London. Tariq at Howell's table. End quote. The probability assessment on Howell's operational function moved from 0.78 active protocol to 0.91 entity instrument in the UK institutional framework. 0.91 is the threshold. The threshold had been crossed. The updated report was filed at 1,124 hours on July 7, 2005, while the Metropolitan Police were still accounting for the dead at Aldgate, Edgware Road, Piccadilly, and Tavistock Square. The updated report was 3 pages, filed through the same institutional channel, received at 1,137 hours. The receiving officer's institutional position was 2 levels below the entity's operational reach. The report was not elevated. What I want you to understand about London in the summer of 2005 is that the institutional environment, after July 7th, produced a specific condition: heightened visibility. Everything gets looked at. Every file gets touched. Every assessment gets reviewed. In theory, this is the moment the June 18th assessment gets picked up and elevated. In practice, the heightened visibility is itself a visibility management opportunity. When everything is being looked at, the specific things you do not want looked at closely can be made visible enough to be seen without being elevated enough to be understood. The June 18th assessment was reviewed on July 12th as part of the post-July 7th institutional audit. It was categorized as a routine analytical product regarding internal framework integrity. Recommended for continued standard processing. No elevation, no action flag. The categorization, made by an analyst whose institutional position was 2 levels below the entity's operational reach. This is the entity's methodology: not deletion, not suppression, institutional positioning. Place the architecture correctly, and the information manages itself. The file does not disappear. End. End. The file is simply never in the right place at the right time to produce the consequence it would produce if it arrived at the right level at the right moment. The bank holds the document. The current sorts it. I ran surveillance detection routes through August 2005 while the official inquiry into the July 7th attacks was being established. The Anchor Pub on Thursdays. Doe. Howell was there on July 14th, the first Thursday after the attack, at 1,809 hours. Same table, same briefcase placement, same pint. Alone. No Tariq. The formation observed from 4.1 meters. Ordered coffee, 87 degrees Celsius. The Anchor's espresso machine had never been calibrated. The formation did not adjust the grind. Some calibration errors belong to the environment. Stop. There is a question that belongs here, placed in this file, because the architecture requires it, and because this is where the weight is. When you have built a file for 9 months, when you have filed the report on June 18th and watched it sit on a 90-day processing timeline, when you have watched the city around you register the consequence of what the report documented, when you have filed the update on July 7th at 1,124 hours while the city is still accounting for its dead, when the probability assessment on whether your file, if it had reached the right level on June 19th rather than September 15th, would have changed anything on July 7th morning is 0.31. When the 0.69 is the weight you carry alongside the 0.31, what does the formation do with the 0.31? The formation registers it, files it, carries it in the specific way the formation carries things it cannot close. The 0.31 is not a small number in the context it occupies. A 31% probability that a 1-4-page assessment, properly elevated on June 19th, would have produced a chain of institutional actions that might have altered the morning of July 7th. That is not a negligible weight. It is a structural weight, and the formation was built to carry structural weights. What the formation does with the 0.31 is this. It goes into the physical archive alongside the June 18th assessment and the July 3rd addendum and the July 7th update and the documentation of the institutional processing that kept the file at standard level across 3 separate filings. The 0.31 is documented. The entity's visibility management of the June 18th assessment is documented. The Howell-Tariq meeting is documented. The probability assessment connecting Howell's institutional position to the entity's UK operational geography, documented at 0.91. The archive holds all of it. The archive does not resolve any of it. The archive is not in the resolution business. The archive is in the record business. Now, the dead drop at Whitechapel that went unserviced on the morning of July 7th. I told you at the beginning of this file that what it contained matters and that I would give it to you after the Howell file. Here it is. The material deposited on June 19th and confirmed intact on the morning of July 7th was not a standard documentation product. It was a 3-page handwritten assessment, not in the formation's handwriting, in Walsh's, received through the Geneva Documentation Node's emergency channel on June 15th, 3 days before the formation filed the June 18th institutional report. Walsh's Geneva node had been running since June 2003, 25 months of operational documentation. The material it had produced was the structural gap analysis applied to the entity's UK institutional presence, the same analytical methodology Walsh had been developing since Brussels in 1995. Applied now to the specific question of how the entity had positioned itself within the British-American intelligence sharing framework that had been building since the post-Cold War reorganization of the early 1990s. Walsh's 3-page assessment arrived at the Whitechapel dead drop on June 15th. The formation retrieved it at 0615 hours. Read it twice. Then filed the institutional report on June 18th, 3 days later, incorporating Walsh's structural analysis into the formation's operational observation without attributing the analytical framework to Walsh. The institutional report was stronger for it. The institutional report could not say where the framework came from. Walsh's assessment contained one specific finding that 9 months of Thursday observations had not produced. She had identified the institutional mechanism through which the entity maintained Howell's insulation from the standard elevation process, not the personnel positioned 2 levels below. The structural feature of the UK-US framework that made standard processing the natural landing point for assessments of exactly this category. The entity had not placed specific people at specific levels to manage this file. The entity had, over the course of the early 2000s, shaped the framework's categorization architecture so that assessments of this category would naturally process at standard level. The personnel making the categorization decisions were not entity instruments. They were analysts, working correctly within a framework that had been architecturally shaped to produce this result. The entity had not managed visibility at the personnel level. It had managed it at the framework level. The entity was not an actor operating within institutional structures. The entity was, in the UK institutional environment, a structural architect. It had built the walls it was operating inside. And the walls looked like normal institutional architecture to everyone operating inside them, because they were. The architecture was correct. It produced correct outcomes for the institution's stated purposes. It also produced the entity's preferred visibility management as a byproduct of its correct functioning, not a bug, a feature. Designed in. Walsh had identified this. The formation had documented it. The archive held it. The Whitechapel dead drop held Walsh's 3 pages from June 15th to July 7th. The formation confirmed the location's integrity on the morning of July 7th at 0917 hours, 27 minutes after the Aldgate event. The material was retrieved on July 9th. Walsh's analysis was incorporated into the physical archive on July 10th. The full Howell documentation, 9 months of Thursday observations, the June 18th report, the July 3rd addendum, the July 7th update, Walsh's structural finding, and the complete institutional processing record entered the physical archive in its consolidated form on July 10, 2005. The archive held it. On August 4, 2005, Howell did not appear at the Anchor Pub on his Thursday. The first Thursday absence in 38 weeks of observation. Probability assessment, 0.41. Operational security response, to internal awareness of being observed. 0.33 Institutional reassignment or schedule disruption. 0.26 All other categories. Filed as unresolved. Howell returned on August 11th, alone. Same table, same briefcase on the left chair. No contact appeared. The formation observed from 4.1 meters. The 3,200 Kelvin amber lighting of the anchor at 1,830 hours. The Thames, 200 meters north, moving on its tidal schedule at whatever direction the Atlantic was pulling it in that specific hour. Patient, reversible, not going anywhere except where the tide takes it. There is something about the London posting that belongs in this account before this file closes, not the operational conclusion. The operational conclusion belongs to a subsequent file. What belongs here is about the specific kind of weight the London posting produced that no previous posting had produced in the same form. Every previous posting had produced weight through what the posting required. Vienna's unverifiable decision, London's trust cost, Budapest's calibration error, Brussels's compliance gap, Amman's file person, Beirut's 5-person room, Cairo's 3 years of unnamed protection, each weight produced by the specific configuration of the posting. Amman. The London posting produced its weight differently, through institutional proximity. For the first time in the operational career, the entity was not abstract. The entity was the framework the formation was operating inside. The institutional channel through which the June 18th assessment had been filed was part of the entity's operational architecture. The people processing the assessment at standard level were not enemy agents. They were analysts doing their jobs correctly within a framework that had been architecturally shaped to produce this outcome. The entity did not need instruments at every level. It needed the framework to be correctly shaped. Walsh had identified this. The formation had documented it. The archive held it. The weight of operating inside the thing you are documenting is different from the weight of operating against it from the outside. The formation calibrates for this. The calibration is imperfect. The imperfection is itself a data point. Filed. I walked the embankment most mornings when the operational schedule allowed. The Thames at its tidal pace. The specific quality of London river light in August 2005, the angle of late summer northern light, the atmospheric moisture, the breath vapor dispersing in approximately 0.4 seconds in the August warmth, the dome of St. Paul's to the north, across the river, 297 years old in August. In November, it would be 298. The city had been processing large events for significantly longer than any operational career. The city did not require the formation's assessment of its condition. The formation noted this, filed it, and continued running. The London posting did not conclude in August 2005. The Howell file was not closed. What August produced was a specific operational state. The documentation was complete enough to hold. Not complete enough to act on at the institutional level, complete enough to be safe in the physical archive, complete enough to be part of the record. The threshold for institutional action was 0.9. The Howell file stood at 0.91. Walsh's architectural finding stood at Walsh's finding, did not produce a probability weight. It produced an architectural conclusion. Framework assessments do not resolve into probability weights. They resolve into structural facts. Walsh's structural fact was this. The entity had built the walls it was operating inside. The walls looked correct because they were correct. They also produced the entity's preferred outcomes as a feature of their correct functioning. This is what the London posting contributed to the documentation. The entity was not just an actor managing visibility. The entity was a visibility architect. And the architecture had been in place long enough that no one inside it could see the design anymore. The dead drop at Whitechapel received one additional deposit in September 2005, not from the formation, from a contact whose file name is not in this account, but is in the physical archive. The deposit confirmed Walsh's structural finding from a different operational position, the North African institutional environment, where the same framework architecture had been producing the same visibility management outcomes since the early 2000s. Independent confirmation. Compound probability assessment applied to Walsh's structural finding, 0.002, that two independent operational environments would produce the same observation of the same framework feature if the feature were not real. Compound confirmation, 0.998. The entity's UK operation was architectural. There is one thing more this file should contain. The formation was on the Aldgate platform on the morning of July 7th because it was running an SDR. The SDR was running at 0850 because the dead drop window at Whitechapel opened at 0900 and closed at 0945. The formation had been running SDRs to that dead drop on the 9th and 19th of each month across November 2004 to June 2005. July 9th would have been the next scheduled service date. The July 7th visit was unscheduled, a confirmation run, triggered by the July 3rd Tariq Howell meeting and the elevated operational tempo that meeting had produced. The formation was on the Aldgate platform at 8 hours 50 minutes and 1 seconds because of the July 3rd meeting. The July 3rd meeting was in the archive because of 9 months of Thursday observations. The formation does not produce determinist conclusions from this sequence. Events do not mean the things that our proximity to them would make them appear to mean. The formation was on the platform. The formation survived. The carrying structure held. The archive grew. These are the operational facts. The weight they produce is real. The weight is not a conclusion. It is a registration. The Howell file at the close of the London posting's active documentation phase, 387 words, the single largest file growth across a single posting in the operational career. 31 words in February 2004. 387 words by November 2005. The growth was the product of 9 months of Thursday evenings in a Bankside pub, 3 pages from Walsh's Geneva node, 1 July 3rd meeting, 1 July 7th morning, and the specific architectural finding that the London posting was the only posting in the operational career equipped to produce. The file was ready. The weight had arrived. The archive held it. I will give you one thing from this file that belongs to the next file rather than this one. The September deposit at the Whitechapel dead drop, the independent confirmation from the North African institutional environment, came with a single sentence written in a handwriting the formation had not seen before. 7 words. I am not giving you those 7 words in this file. They are the opening of what comes next. They belong to the geography where the next file will be set. When you have that geography, the 7 words will have the weight they are designed to carry. The weight is real. The archive holds it. The next file will begin where this one ends. The Thames at 1.2 meters per second. Title: The bank holds. The water moves in whatever direction the Atlantic is pulling it. The dome of St. Paul's to the north. End quote. 297 years of holding its position above the river, the formation running continuously through all of it, registering, filing, carrying, too. The archive grows 1 word at a time, 1 data point at a time, 1 Thursday evening at a time. The gray operative, every week, without exception, the architecture holds. The significance is approaching. Stay in the shadows.